This episode of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl podcast is driven by Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy. CGA is the world's most comprehensive online gun dog training resource. They've got over 160 instructional videos that includes everything that you need to take a 7-week-old puppy to a finished gun dog. Visit cornerstonegundoacademy.com to sign up for their free preview module and begin your training journey today. Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy, the most advanced gun dog training resource on the web. You are listening to the HP Outdoors Waterfowl podcast, episode 155. This week on the show, we're joined by the guys from Sound Gear. We're talking hearing loss and hearing protection and why you should care about it more this season. All right, welcome to episode 155 of the HP Outdoors Waterfowl podcast, where your on-demand audio source for all things waterfowl and waterfowl hunting. You can check us out at hpoutdoors.com. Find us across all social media platforms out there, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you're a Facebook user, you can join our Facebook listeners group, chat with a bunch of like-minded hunters. And you can find our show anywhere quality podcast content can be found. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you get your quality podcast content, you will find our show. I'm your host, Josh Palm. I'll be joined shortly here by my co-host, Dan Harushka. We're split squad again this week, unfortunately. Schedules have been super busy, so Dan handled the interview load this week for the show, and he's joined by Lance Kramer and Dr. Dave Fabry of Sound Gear to talk about hearing protection and why protecting our hearing is so important and sort of all the things that go into that. You know, it's something that we've talked about for a long time on the show, and something that Dan and I have been a big supporter of and have practiced protecting our hearing and things like that. So, Dan will get into that with them and go through all that stuff that will hopefully give you some perspective on why it's so important and all of that great stuff. But before we do all of that, I do want to take a minute to thank the sponsors of this week's episode, brought to you this week by Lifetime Decoys. New for 2019, Lifetime Decoys Flex Float Mallard decoys set the new standard for quality and durability in waterfowl decoys. An EVA foam, open bottom construction combined with the patent pending dual flow swim keel system allows for more movement with less wind, the ability to sit flat on ice and dirt, and virtually indestructible design, which can be shot or otherwise punctured and still float. Each decoy weighs only 11 ounces with the self-righting keels removed, or 19 ounces with the weights installed. Check them out today at lifetimedecoys.com. Also, thank you to Gunner Kennels, engineered for your dog, designed for travel, and built for your peace of mind. The G1 Kennel has set a new industry standard and put Gunner in a category all its own. Gunner Kennels was started to protect your pet, and it continues to be at the center of everything they do, and they're dedicated to building the best and safest pet travel crate on the market, because man's best friend deserves man's best kennel. Check out their G1 series of kennels and accessories at gunnerkennels.com. Also, thank you to BaseMap. It's the most comprehensive mapping app helping hunters plan, navigate, and share their next outdoor adventure. BaseMap includes over 700 mapping layers to help hunters plan at home or navigate in the field. From property ownership information to hunting unit boundaries, BaseMap is your go-to mapping app for anyone looking to be more successful on their next hunt. No cell service, no problem. Download unlimited high-res offline maps to use while in the field. And BaseMap is free to download and available on iOS and Android, covering all 50 states. Visit basemap.com to learn more and download today. Own the outdoors with BaseMap. Also, thank you to 737 Duck and Goose Calls, original design, select grade components, superior sound, and unparalleled service. 737 takes exceptional pride in producing the finest quality, best built premium calls in the market today. They're made right here in America and offered only direct to consumers through their website. Shipping in the U.S. is always free. International orders are now accepted online, and a 20-day money-back guarantee and lifetime warranty accompanies every call purchased. 737 Duck Calls lead the flock. And finally, for this week, thank you to Duck Camp. Our friends over at Duck Camp have joined up with the HP community And Duck Camp makes high-quality hunting apparel in their own camouflage patterns and premium fabrics. These guys are shaking up the industry. More modern take on hunting apparel. Duck Camp makes super nice lightweight, midweight, and heavyweight hunting shirts that are perfect for the blind, back at camp or out in town. I've had the chance to try out their 3-layer ultralight rain jacket, and I love that thing. It's super lightweight, breathable, just a really quality piece of gear. It breathes unlike most rain jackets out there, and it's also a great camouflage outer shell for cold weather hunts. You can layer underneath it quite easily. Packs into its own pocket, perfect for blind bags. Check out the new rain jackets and all their great apparel over at duckcamp.com. All right, so as I mentioned, this week's topic is we are hitting on hearing protection, and there's a lot of information out there. I think a lot of us have all experienced situations in the blind where we've had someone kind of beside us or from our own shooting sort of ring in our ears and that kind of thing. And I don't know if everyone truly has an appreciation for how much damage that really does. I know for a long time I really didn't. So kind of talking this week about some harmful sound levels, prevention, products that sort of help, avoid some potential long-term effects of this stuff. Just some great tips to help you be a little more safe in the field because, hearing is one of those things where when it's gone, it's gone. And unless you want to speed up that process and be looking at hearing aids and all that kind of stuff, those of us that are in the blind and exposed to a lot of muzzle blasts and all that kind of stuff from shooting, it's absolutely worth the hassle or the perceived hassle or whatever it may be to protect your hearing when you have the opportunity to do so. So great stuff coming to you this week on that front. I do have to apologize for the delay in the release of this week's episode for those that look forward to the new episodes every week and early in their work week. I've just been super busy personally. I'll take the fault for this one. I've I've talked about on the show a lot. I've coached my son's baseball team, and I've been recently elected to the local Little League board of directors. So I've been attending meetings for all of that stuff. So very busy time, but we're still going to get them out to you on a weekly basis. Try to get them as close as we can to the early part of the week, but life happens and we're just, kind of dealing with the best we can. So we're split crew this week. Dan handled the interview. We also have our trip coming up to Canada in the very, very near future. I'm recording this on Thursday, October 10th. Thursday of next week, I will be on a flight to Canada. So reports of birds moving in big numbers up there right now. So we're super excited to get up there, and I'm sure we will have a lot more coverage and a lot more stuff coming out of that trip in the very near future. So hang on for some of that coming up. But without further ado, let me go ahead and hand it over to Dan and have him sit down with the guys from Sound Gear. Take it away, Dan.
And tonight we have joining us Lance Kramer and Dr. Dave. Dr. Dave Fabry. I was told to introduce you as Dr. Dave, so I hope that's okay.
That works.
We're talking to guys from Starkey and Sound Gear, and we are talking all things hearing loss, and why we should be really concerned about wearing hearing protection. So guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Lance, let's get started with you, man. What's your backstory? How'd you get to where you are? I know you're a big hunter, and it took us a week or two because you were up in a bear stand, I believe. So, what's your backstory, bud?
Backstory, lifelong hunter. Basically, my family growing up, that was ingrained in us. Hunting, conservation. And it's just really a tradition with our family. So I've literally been hunting and been with my dad hunting for, ducks, pheasants, everything, probably since I could walk. I mean, I remember times in the duck blind where literally, you spent, entire days out there with them. And it was a great time, really drove my passion to do so. And then obviously with, upland hunting, pheasants, grouse at the cabin, northern Minnesota. You mentioned bear hunting. I've been bear hunting since I was 12. Got my first bear when I was 13. But first and foremost, definitely a passionate duck hunter, passionate goose hunter. My whole life for that. went to school in North Dakota, and I would say that is exactly where I can probably bring it back to where my passion for duck hunting came to fruition. University of North Dakota, Grand Forks. Scheduled my classes in the fall around duck hunting. I'm sure there's a few listeners out there that can probably relate to that. No morning classes. Everything was after 11 o'clock in the fall. And that's all I did was duck hunt. And really, you're part of the flyway there. And, the duck hunting and goose hunting is just unreal. So obviously you can imagine, it's an addiction more than anything for duck hunting. And then where I got today, obviously I went to school there, graduated 2009, started at Starkey Hearing Technologies in 2011 in January, and then was asked, to take on the Sound Gear brand. It was a newly created brand for us at Starkey. It started out in customer service on the hearing aid side of our business. And just kind of fell at the right place, right time. My manager at the time, managed our hearing protection products as well as our government business for Starkey Hearing Technologies. And, they asked if I wanted to take on this brand, knowing that I was passionate about hunting and shooting and things like that. And I said, sure, why not? 25, 26 years old. Yeah, I'll take that on. No big deal. And then it's grown from there. We have a history of making, over 30 years of making electronic hearing protection products at Starkey, and Sound Gear being the most recent brand. And it's developed from, non-custom products to custom products. And, it's been a great ride. And like I said, I'm passionate about what I do, which is makes your job easier when you can, work with like-minded individuals and enjoy your hobbies while you're working. A lot of times too, that doesn't hurt. But yeah, that's kind of where I got my start, I guess. It goes all the way back when I was a kid hunting, and still to this day, more passionate than ever before.
And, as we were talking before, you alluded to the fact that until you started working there, all those college days that you went out hunting, you did not wear any hearing protection.
Well, it's crazy to think about that, because I remember the first time we always wore foam plugs or muffs and things like that growing up, shooting traps, sporting clays, primarily sporting clays, and go to the rifle range, set your deer rifles in, we'd put muffs on or something along those lines. But when it came to hunting, it was never even a topic of conversation. Never once. Like, in the blind with my dad at 5, 6 years old. And it was just a lack of education, not anybody's fault. My dad didn't know. Nobody really knew. And that was, 28 plus years ago. And then in North Dakota, yeah, like the first time I saw somebody wear hearing protection, a set of electronic muffs, I don't even know what brand they were, to be honest with you, but they, I kind of looked at them funny. I go, what, you can't handle a few gunshots? And that's where, that's how unaware I was, I guess, the best way to put it, of the effect of hearing loss and how bad it can be. I didn't even take it seriously then. Until I started working at Starkey, never once thought about putting hearing protection in while hunting. Needed the ability to hear, didn't really know these products existed. And I'd say with, since I've started the awareness, been at Starkey for almost 9 years now already. 8 years. What is the math there? That's right. This will start over. But 8+ years at Starkey, I'd say the awareness in this space has jumped up tenfold. I mean, it's just crazy the amount of people that are wearing hearing protection, pushing their kids to wear it. Dads come through at trade shows and things like that saying, I don't want my kid to end up like me, deaf. And they'll buy their kids, the best of the best, because they don't want them to have a hearing loss. So, I mean, yeah, I never wore it, period. It just never even came to mind.
It is crazy to think about. The same thing, we would sight our rifles in and wear, the muffs, and then you go out in a stand and they did not follow you out in the woods.
No.
Like it just didn't happen, which is really crazy. And we can circle back to that. Dr. Fabry.
How about Dave? Yeah, that works. And so I came at this a little different direction. I grew up in Wisconsin in Green Bay. Interestingly, although Lance will tell you, Minnesota calls itself a land of 10,000 lakes and prides itself on its outdoor stuff. Wisconsin has more lakes than Minnesota, and as much or more to do on those lakes. And I certainly grew up being outdoors. But my interest at a fairly young age was kindled in audiology, and I'm an audiologist. My dad worked in a paper mill in Wisconsin and was exposed to a lot of noise as a result of being in a work environment where the levels often exceeded, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but they exceeded a level that you could comfortably listen to without acquiring some loss over time. And so then, ironically, when I ended up going to college at the University of Minnesota, I started working for a guy that was instrumental in assessing those safe levels before you would be at risk for some sort of hearing loss. And so my interest, also similar to what both you are talking about, I was a drummer and motorcyclist and outdoorsman at an early age. And what often occurs for a lot of people is when you're young, you don't think about and you take for granted that your hearing is good. And whether you want to hear birds or you want to hear game or whatever you want to hear in the wild or in an urban environment, you take for granted that hearing is pretty resilient at a young age. But if you expose it to enough loud sounds over time, you can acquire a permanent hearing loss that requires the use of hearing aids later on in order to hear better. And so finding my way, I've been with Stark about 10 years. I'm 37 years an audiologist. And so it's really been my passion, not only to fix hearing when it's broken, if you will, but also on this topic to really talk on the other end of the scale. It would seem kind of crazy that I work for a hearing aid manufacturer and I'd be talking about preventing hearing loss. But there's plenty of people, some estimates over 40 million in the U.S., and 500 million people around the world with what is considered to be a disabling amount of hearing loss. And so there's plenty of work to do, and I just as soon prevent a few of those losses from occurring before it's too late.
Yeah, there's definitely that, when you're younger or going through college, like, I don't know if it's the testosterone or just tough man syndrome, oh, well, I'll be fine, I can handle it. And then you get a little later in life and see your old man and he can't hear what you're saying or your kids are saying. And then before you know it, you can't hear what your wife's saying. So that's about where I'm at right now. And I know, Josh isn't on here tonight, but he has the constant ringing in his ears. And, something that we preach on here quite a bit is the safety before it gets to that point. And I'm really excited to have you guys on and talking about this. So,
Thank you.
So I guess we can go, how about we go into maybe some of the levels, if we can talk about that. Just the constant, and I guess the damage.
Yeah, let me talk first
damage.
about sort of the governing bodies, and those are OSHA and then NIOSH, the National Institute on Occupational Hearing. And they established some decades ago what are considered to be safe limits that a person could be exposed to, whether it's gunshot or whether it's machine noise or even music at a concert. And then what happens is sound is measured in a couple ways. It's the frequency or the pitch of the sound and the intensity or decibel level of the sound. And the softest sounds that we hear are around 0 decibels. And the loudest sounds that we can comfortably hear for a sustained basis are probably up around 110, 120 decibels before it starts to become comfortable for any period of time and before it can cause some damage. But as I mentioned earlier, there has been a lot of research looking at the time and the intensity trade-off of how long you can be exposed safely to a sound before it becomes either temporarily or potentially permanently damaging to our hearing. And I'll talk a little bit about some early warnings. You mentioned tinnitus, and that's certainly one warning sign that the ear is sending off. And we'll talk a little bit about where tinnitus occurs in the different regions, if you will, the inner, the middle, or the outer ear of your hearing anatomy. But the issue is OSHA originally established a safe level of about 90 decibels for an 8-hour sustained exposure. Later, NIOSH lowered that to around 85 decibels. When I say 85 decibels, what does that translate to? When I'm talking right now on this podcast, I'm probably talking at about 65 to 70 decibels. And then when I shoot up to 85, I'd have to be shouting in order to sustain that. And to put it into perspective, some various levels of gunfire, for example, different rifles or shotguns will range anywhere from 140 to 160 decibels peak levels. Those aren't sustained over any period of time, but even just a single exposure, if it catches you just right, can cause some temporary and even permanent loss. But going back to this trade-off between the duration and the intensity, if we say 85 decibels for 8 hours, then if you go up by 3 dB to 88 decibels, that's 4 hours, 91, 2 hours, 94, 1 hour, etc. So by the time you're in a sustained level of 100 decibels, you're really only safe for about a 15-minute exposure. And when you put that into perspective, you go into a loud concert and you get up right up in the front by the speakers. That can exceed easily 100 decibels for 15 minutes. And if you've ever gone to a concert and come out of it, or after an episode of shooting before you were wearing hearing protection, where your ears felt a little stuffy, a little plugged, that's a telltale indicator that you were likely above that level and exceeded the duration that was considered comfortable for at least a temporary, what we call a temporary threshold shift or a temporary reduction in the sensitivity of your hearing. It can be that stuffiness, the plug sensation, and especially if you hear ringing. Because what happens is when you think about your ear, what you see on the outside, the external ear where you hang your glasses on or your sunglasses on, that actually works like a funnel to try to capture sound and funnel it down your ear canal, which is also considered the outer part of the ear. It's interesting because it's a natural amplifier, and the ear actually amplifies certain frequencies of sound by 10 or 15 dB in certain frequency regions, and then it puts it into the middle ear, your eardrum, and the 3 smallest bones in your body, where it translates that into the cochlea, the inner ear, and that's where the damage is occurring from noise exposure. And it's sort of interesting in the sense that the region that's important for understanding speech is also the region that funnel, your outer ear, enhances sound and amplifies it and causes the damage first in regions that are very important, as you mentioned, for hearing your wife speak. Consonant sounds, S, SH, TH, honey, come in, I've got a project for you to do. We call this sometimes selective hearing loss, and it afflicts both men and women, I'll tell you, in equal numbers. But, it also
That's science. Yeah.
Yeah, that's science right there. Science in action. And but those regions that are most sensitive for the human voice often tend to be the regions that are most easily damaged by noise exposure. So, questions about that? Did that just get way too wonky in terms of the longer you listen to a loud sound, the more likely you are to incur damage? Rifles and various shotguns, certainly, and rifles can produce levels in a very short burst that exceed 140 to 160 dB. And even a single episode unprotected can cause temporary loss that, if you continued to expose yourself over time to it, could cause permanent loss.
Yeah, and I'm looking, I think you probably have the chart memorized, but I have one up here, and I'm looking at it, and it gets up to the 118. You can have it for 14 seconds, 127, 1 second. Once you hit that 140, it says, the maximum exposure time per 24 hours, you should have no exposure over 140. Right. And you're telling me a shotgun or a rifle can be, up to 160 peaked out.
Yeah, and that's the peak level. And so that would be like for a 30-06 is a Remington model 742 is 163.6 dB peak sound pressure level. And then you get down to your 22s, and that's around 139, 140, and then everything in between.
But as far as, the people listening, if you're out on a duck hunt or a waterfowl hunt, I mean, where you should be getting no exposure at that 140 level, you could be getting that constantly while you're in the blind.
Absolutely.
And that is what, that's what we're talking about here. And one question when you were talking that popped in my head, sometimes, I'm looking at the numbers here again, and you said 80, 85, you'd have to be kind of
8 hours.
8 hours, and you'd have to be talking really, really loud. What?
Yeah, I'd be up at this level like this, and that would be maybe 85 if I was shouting the whole interview, and you'd want to shut this down.
So when I go to the movie theater and that movie starts up, and I sit there for an hour and a half or 2 hours, now is OSHA regulating that? Do they have to be below a certain level? Because sometimes I'm like, this is crushing my ears right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting you say that, because I find that in particular, I just went on the weekend and saw Joker in an IMAX theater, and the audio is fantastic. But, you can, if a person wonders what sort of levels are out there in everyday life, on an iPhone or an Android phone, you can download an app that is a sound level meter. We have one that we make, and there are many others out there. And it's surprising how intense some of these environments are to try to draw you in. But the trick is that it has to be sustained at that level. And the way that movie theaters often get around it is there's dynamics that are brief bursts that may exceed 100 dB, but then it settles back down. And so when we really talk about 85 decibels of continuous level, if I kept my voice at an elevated level, it'd be annoying as hell, for one. But it wouldn't necessarily be damaging unless I was talking to you for 8 hours. And the movie theaters are similar. The crests and the peaks of that, as long as they stay under, and the chart that you're looking at talks about this 140 decibel point as being a critical exposure level where there really isn't any safe exposure. And that's what we'll get into talking about, and Lance can talk about the need for protection to prevent hearing loss, because I think the if there's one take-home message is that some of your larger gauge shotguns and rifles can trigger at least a temporary threshold shift from as little as just a few rounds. And that's where we really want to see and educate people that there is no safe exposure limit without using either foamies or some sort of electronic protection, and wanting to be able to hear and converse with other people, because there's a safety element to being able to hear other hunters around you too, right, while also protecting your hearing when one of you is taking a shot.
And I guess, going to everyday life too, like a sustained sound of, if I'm on my riding lawnmower, what is that level at?
It depends. It can exceed 95 to 100 dB and on your riding lawnmower. And so, if you've got a big yard, you can start. I talked about NIOSH talked about 100 dB level. Can start to get in the 15 to 20 minute range, and that's not that big of a lawn if you're using a riding lawnmower that's putting up at that high a level. So I recommend to a lot of people, even if you're just using your muffs or some sort of plugs, or Lance can talk a little bit about other options as well, but just have a set. It's worth the price of your hearing to just keep some of those plugs or muffs handy anytime you're around any home equipment. And there is yet another reason to consider that, is that you already alluded to the fact that the regulatory bodies talk about the 24-hour safe exposure, because the ear sort of resets itself the way you do every day. Within a 24-hour period, it's looking at the total accumulated noise exposure. And there are many other studies, and I can provide you with some of the background if you want to share it with your listeners, that talks about the prevalence or the percentage of people in various occupations that have hearing loss. When we talk about the U.S., it's estimated to be around 10 to 15% of the overall population has some hearing loss. But some occupations, if you work in construction, for example, even as a younger person, because of the loud noises that you're often around, the prevalence or incidence of hearing loss in that population is in many cases almost double that of the typical population. And so the critical thing is if you're working in noise all day and then you come home and enjoy other noisy hobbies, you ride a motorcycle, you woodwork, you hunt, you listen to music loud, you do something else, keep in mind that your ear sort of has this accumulator throughout the entire 24-hour period that you need to be mindful of, because work and play can contribute to an increased or elevated risk for hearing loss.
Nice. A lot of great info. And going, before we get into some of the plugs that can help you, what about the AirPods and, everyone's walking down the road with their phone connected to their face and something in their ears and just zoned out. How high can those levels get?
Well, it's a really good point too, and I became interested this some number of years ago. I have a 27-year-old daughter now, but when she was young, everyone knew that I was sort of the hearing guy in the neighborhood, and so they said, "Well, what is too loud?" When she was young, it was when the iPods and personal sound amplifiers were first coming out in force, and I said, "Well, if you can stand an arm length away from your kid and hear the song that they're listening to and sing along with it, it's too loud." So as a general rule of thumb, that was always my mantra. But then as we got more and more sophisticated headsets and insert ear monitors, that rule doesn't apply anymore, because now, whether it's a kid or an adult, you can have some pretty well sealed insert earphones and listen at levels that place you at the same risk as a factory worker of old, where they would be requiring you to wear hearing protection. And as we have more and more people working in open work environments, they're isolating their work environment by listening to music all day long. And in some cases that can be high. And case in point, a number of years ago, I was working at the University of Miami, and they have a very good music school there. And so it was when, iPod use was at an all-time high among millennials. And a lot of these kids coming into the program were passionate about music, and they were listening or playing music all day, every day. And so I started to see that even kids as young as 18 years of age, college freshmen, were coming in with hearing loss like factory workers. And what we have seen, to your point, is there appears to be, at the very least, a correlation with the early onset of this noise-induced loss, like we'd see in a farmer or a factory worker, in kids listening to MP3 players. So the general rule of thumb that I would say now is, if you have children that have their own sources of music, take their music or their phone. Increasingly, their phone is their music player, and the actual headsets. It's very important that you're using the headsets that they're listening to. And if they're listening at a level that's uncomfortable for you, it's uncomfortable for them. And then the nice thing is, on Android phones and on iPhones, there are parental controls that you can set limits on. So if you're worried about the levels that kids are listening to, because the ear is agnostic to whether it's gunfire, machinery, or music. If it's at a certain level for a certain duration, it can cause temporary and ultimately permanent damage. And so I'd be just as vigilant about the message we're trying to bring today, and appreciate your having us on the podcast, for hunters as I am for hunters' kids, especially if they hunt and listen to music and have other noisy hobbies, because the ear just is looking at all of that exposure on a daily basis, and all of it can add up to damage.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. The parental controls, I did not know that, and my kids are still about to turn 6 and 4.5, so they don't have their own devices yet. But that is definitely good to know that down the road, when I end up having to cave and buy those for them, that I can control the actual levels of it, and that's that is a very good point. And going back, Lance, let's. I have so many questions right now, but let's go back. Let's go back to sound gear. And I'm looking over the website. I have it up right now, and one of the first things, when you're out there and there's a lot of hearing protection and different companies, and when you come to sound gear, there are so many affordable options that stand out, and I think that is something that sets you guys apart. Maybe you can speak to how you guys are able to do that, and maybe we can get into some of the different levels of product that you have.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we manufacture all of our own products at Starkey Hearing Technology. Soundgear just being a brand, under the Starkey umbrella. So we we actually manufacture all of our own technology, manufacture all of our own products, develop our own technology, and everything on, from a sound gear perspective is truly benefiting from, the millions of dollars we spend every year on our hearing aid development. So the technology in these products is, it's very high. It is the latest, hearing aid technology, which people wear 12, 14 hours a day. But we also thought it was important and made sure to have a product out that people could use, a product at a price point that, most people can afford. And, we have non-custom options, custom options, and things like that, going all the way down to around $150 a pair for a pair of, custom solid earplugs, which they don't provide amplification, but you really can't beat a custom fit on an earplug. And, I can't stress enough how important the fit is, because without a proper fit or a proper seal in the ear canal with a plug or a muff or any product that you're using, it's basically like wearing nothing at all. You have to have a good fit, a good seal. And I argue, and I don't know, maybe Dave can counter me on this, but I would say people that wear foam plugs at 70%, 80% probably don't have them in properly. And everybody says, I know how to put earplugs in. Well, I've seen people at the range, and I've seen earplugs fall out of people's ears while they're shooting sporting clays. It's it's like, well, that's not a good fit. But we do, want to make sure that we have an option for everybody. The custom side obviously is a little more expensive, but we do make standard. We call them standard products in the industry, but standard or off the shelf type products for people as well.
And what is, one of the first things that popped out, and it's right in the $200 price range, the instant fit. Maybe talk about that a little bit and what that goes into.
So the instant fit product was really developed after one of our hearing aids that we had called the AMP. But what we did with the instant fit was, designed a product that, is easy to use, simple, provides amplification and protection, with a couple different sleeves, a large and small sleeve size. So it should fit most everybody. It does not fit everybody. You can't say 99.9%. It does fit most people if worn properly. Sometimes there's those in-betweeners where there's a large sleeve is too big and the small sleeve is too small. It does happen, but we basically wanted to come up with a product that anybody can use or even grow into, especially with kids, right? So kids' ears are constantly changing. So the kid might start, a new hunter, 10, 11, 12 years old, however young, whatever the states require here for laws. But, I started at a very young age. They can grow with the product because there's a small sleeve for their canal, smaller canal, and their ears grow over time. Then they can bump up to the large sleeve as their ear changes. So it's really a great, I'll call it an entry level product, but the technology in it is as good as our custom molded electronics. And it's simple to use. It does, with size come some limitations, of course. It's kind of a set it and forget it type of a device. There's no volume control on it. It's put the battery in, it's on, put it in the silicone sleeve, put it in your ear, make sure you get a good fit. And, you're going to get that environmental awareness with the electronics and the amplification. But then, of course, when you do shoot, you are protected with a 25 dB noise reduction rating with that product.
Very nice. And I did have a question. You were talking about some of the foam pieces coming out of guys' ears and then the proper fit of, your customs, even the non-amplified ones. But, and Dave might be able to speak to this too, but if that isn't fit correctly, and I know I've been in this position before where I had a foam in and the left one was perfect and the right one, it just seemed like something wasn't right. And it almost seems like it's more amplified. And I don't know if that's correct or not, but it just seemed, maybe it's because the left one's actually working and the right one's not. But
yeah, it's probably because if one was seated properly, and I'd agree completely with what Lance said, if you can see if you're hunting with a buddy, if you can see the majority of the plug or really any of the plug sticking out of the ear, it's not inserted deeply enough. And so if you're using the foamies, there's nothing wrong with those, but you got to get them inserted. Otherwise they don't attenuate or reduce the sound. And what you were observing was probably just that. We had seated on the one side, you had a good fit and it was deeply in the canal and really providing an occluded fit. And then the other side probably had what we refer to as a slit leak. So there was somewhere that sound was allowed to come in and it wasn't reducing the sound. And anytime you have a difference between the two ears like that, it almost sounds like the one side is actually making it worse. And it's really just because one is seated and the other is not. But it is a good self-check. If you're observing that, then it's very likely, as I said, if you have a buddy with you, just have him or her look at the other ear and see, and then just take the plug out and reinsert it if that's what you're using.
Well, I think, like you said, if he can see most of it, it's not incorrectly. And I would have to say most of the time they are not put in correctly because you can see.
I agree.
You can see. So on that point, are you supposed to push it down, twist it, and insert it? Is that the correct way to do it?
You're supposed to roll it, put it in, and then hold it, and then hold it there. Until it expands fully to create a seal. And a lot of people just try to jam them in there and like, oh, that's good. And they twist it a little bit. But realistically, you should be rolling it up before you put it in your ear. Get it in as deep as you can. And then you got to keep your finger or your thumb on it. Yeah. Hold it there until it fully expands.
Right. And the advantage of the rolling it like that is a lot of these materials are pretty sophisticated in that they're somewhat heat sensitive. So it's great if it's the summertime and you roll it like that and you get a little heat, a little friction, and you put it in. But when it's cold and you're hunting, you've got to roll it a little bit, warm it up, get it nice and rolled tightly, then put it in. And then, as Lance said, hold it in your ear. And it takes a few seconds, but it's worth the investment in a few seconds extra time to get that seated properly to prevent hearing loss before it occurs.
Yeah. And once you do have hearing loss, is there anything available right now to get that back besides hearing aids?
Unfortunately not. There are very, very few types of hearing loss that could occur in that outer ear, and that could be anything from earwax or foreign body or debris in the ear canal. There can be something. You said your kids are young right now. Have they ever had an ear infection?
They have.
Yeah, and so that's a loss that we call a middle ear loss, and that's with the three smallest bones in the body, the hammer, anvil, stirrup. And when fluid gets behind that eardrum, that's a temporary loss of hearing that can either be resolved with medication, antibiotics, or potentially tubes. So, some kids will have tubes placed in their ears that actually replace the function of that middle ear when they're growing up. And a lot of kids will eventually grow out of middle ear problems. But that's an example of where you can get a temporary loss of hearing where there is medical or surgical treatment. Unfortunately, over 90% of hearing losses, and I'd say it's venturing up probably 95% of hearing losses are due to reasons that are not currently medically or surgically treatable. So it's a permanent deal, it's a big deal, and you take it for granted until, unfortunately, the damage is already done. Like you mentioned earlier, you kind of get, a little macho when you're younger and you don't think you're doing any damage. And isn't that cool that my ears ring like that after I've been hunting? And then later you're paying the price because you hear it ringing all the time, and then it can become bothersome.
Yeah, that's definitely. I don't have the ringing, like I said, but there is some. I've definitely lost a little bit, and going to that point, there used to be an app, and there probably still is, but you could increase I don't know if it was the pitch of the sound and actually hit play. And I remember like my teachers in college couldn't hear it, but all the kids could. So that would be like a game that we would play, like ringing back and forth, and the teacher would never know what was going on.
That got fairly sophisticated. Kids in Japan, where that app was developed, it's called the Mosquito, and they figured out ways to cheat on tests by using the number of pulses on a multiple choice exam.
Oh my god!
The teacher couldn't hear it, and they could all hear it. But it is sort of a good way to test your hearing.
So,
wow. Where was that out in school?
Pretty creative. Yeah, pretty creative.
That is. Yeah, that's pretty neat. So going back to that, besides the Mosquito app, are there other ways to test where your hearing is at currently?
Yes, and there are a variety of hearing tests that are available either online. We have an online hearing test, and I know again, I'm not plugging that. This is nothing to do with the product, but a hearing test at Starkey.com, and there are also plenty of apps that are available. We also have an app that will test your hearing. One of the challenges is that when you're doing it outside of a calibrated environment, if someone really has a concern that they're having difficulty, if their family members, if their friends, if their colleagues are saying, boy, you're not hearing as well as you were before, or you have concerns that you're missing sounds, I'd recommend that you go to a professional, an audiologist or hearing instrument specialist, and get a test in a calibrated environment, if nothing else, as a baseline. As we go back again, I said certain occupations and certainly certain vocations and then and many hobbies, hunters, it behooves you to get a baseline test when you're in your 20s or 30s and just sort of get an idea of where your hearing levels are now, so that if you're using these protection devices like Lance was talking about, are they working and are they preventing hearing loss from occurring? Because there are situations, if you're shooting a 30-06 and every weekend and shooting a lot of rounds, you might have to do something where you're using some sort of protection, and people will use ear muffs and ear plugs, or some of the electronic devices, because if you're shooting a lot and at high levels, I'd recommend that maybe first using one of the app-based screening tools or online tools. But then if you're seeing that it's coming out saying that you have some concerns, I'd invest in going to see a professional and getting a full diagnostic test as a baseline, and then as well to see if that's continuing to progress. Because increasingly we're seeing that untreated hearing loss as you get older is correlated with a lot of other important health conditions, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, etc. It's a signal in many cases, but also we're seeing more recent studies that are showing untreated hearing loss in the aging population is correlated with cognitive decline and social isolation and loneliness. So these are all treatable with hearing aids. It's not restoring the hearing, as you mentioned, anatomically or physiologically. But the hearing aid technology that your grandparents had is not what is out there today. There's tremendous technology that has really moved to help restore the function and the vibrancy, if you will, of people's ability to hear in quiet and noisy environments. But as we're talking today, what we'd like to do just as well is to prevent that hearing loss from occurring before it does.
Yeah, and when you talk about quality of life, and like I'm just relating it to my own family right now. Like my dad he'll get my kids off the bus, and I'll be like, "Did you guys play with Grandpa today?" And he doesn't really talk to us. Well, he can't hear what they're saying, And it's like, all right, it's time to go and get that checked out. But even back to the hunting scene with him, 2017, we were out in Colorado, and we were set up elk hunting, and we had one guy out in front, and a bull was coming down, and then there were two cows behind him, and we were stuck in the middle of just a open, just some little bit of short brush. And I'm telling my dad, I said, "Dad, range those cows," and he didn't move. I was like, "Dad, range those cows," and we're sitting shoulder to shoulder, and I'm trying to whisper and not be too loud because the guy still had a shot at the bull. I was like, "Range those cows." 4 or 5 times I said that. He didn't hear me once. And they looked really far away because they were across the drainage, but it ended up being like 52 yards, which was an easy shot, with even archery equipment on an elk. But I was like, man, that was kind of stunk. That was one of our last days to hunt, and it could have brought some meat home.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that I've not ever heard that story before, but it's far more common than you'd think, where you have people that are, they like to go out and enjoy what they're doing socially or professionally, and they start all of a sudden experiencing difficulties, just in the example like you said. And in this case, it wasn't life-threatening, but there certainly could be other situations where, you might have to alert him before someone's shooting, or and you want to make sure that he's hearing as well as he can.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Prevent the loss before it occurs. But there is, if someone does suspect that they have a hearing loss, get a diagnostic test, go to somebody that you can trust to give you honest feedback about what technology is available and what's the best technology for you. But don't let the stigma associated with hearing loss prevent a person from living life to the fullest. There's an advocacy group for people with hearing loss that says your hearing loss is more conspicuous than your hearing aid. And I think as we transition into the baby boomers like myself, as hearing aid users, we're less stigmatized by hearing aids and things like that as we think about the way that they can connect to smartphones and do real-time translation and track physical activity. And a lot of this stuff is things that you're seeing in consumer products like what Lance is talking about, but increasingly it's a way to really augment your lifestyle and not think about it as an old-fashioned single-purpose device that just whistles and amplifies sound. And so I would encourage those of your podcast listeners who might be noticing difficulty hearing in specific situations to go in and assess it, do something about it, and see what's available.
And I've heard those stories too with different trade shows going to. I remember one time actually there was a gentleman, I was at the National Wild Turkey Federation down in Nashville, and he was literally in tears because, turkey hunting's religion down south as much as it is other parts of the country. But he basically told me, he goes, all I want to do is be able to hear a hen yelp or a tom gobble again. And he was in tears, and I'd never seen anything like that. And that was, 5-6 years ago already. And I was like, wow, I mean, it's real. That's really what hit home too, was the fact that you're missing out on a lot of things. And, while you're hunting, or, my dad's a prime example of that too, where, he's getting busted by, he can't hear anymore. So he's using his eyes more than his ears, and getting busted by deer in the bow stand. And it's a testament to, years of construction and not wearing protection and things like that. So he's missing out on sounds when you're in the field as much as he is, just everyday life. So
I tell you what, if I had a nickel for every time my dad didn't see a deer till it was right under him, the last 4 or 5 years, man, I could retire. It's like, man, these deer, they're getting sneaky. I'm like, no, you just can't hear. Like, what are you thinking? But Lance, going back to you real quick. All right, so we're talking at 65 decibels. Gunshots could be upwards of 140, 160. When you're talking about the technology with the customs and the amplification, what are the decibels that are allowed to come into that?
So we have our product specific. So there are different programming settings on some of our devices here, but we'll just go with the custom electronic devices. So they have what's called a maximum output of 95 dB. So they will allow, and we do that for a reason. I can speak more to that, but they're designed to amplify sounds up to 95. So they will not electronically amplify sounds above 95 decibels. Mm-hmm. So, okay, that goes against the grain on, that's 10 more dB than what OSHA recommends and things like that. But really what we're allowing for is for quality of sound, opening up bandwidth a little bit from cranking up your devices with amplification, being able to have clear, crisper sound. And what we're really trying to do is protect you from the impulse noises like gunshots that are going to blow well past 95. And one of the most, a representation of kind of some of the marketing that's been done over the years and things like that is you won't hear anything above 85 dB, which is false. Basically, the electronic devices provide amplification so you can hear in between every shot. The protection you're actually getting from the devices has literally nothing to do with the electronics as much as it does the fit. And then we talk about the fit and the seal and things like that. The devices are actually turning into a earplug for that fraction of a millisecond when you shoot or somebody else shoots around you. And as soon as that gunshot dissipates, that amplification comes back on. It's seamless. You won't even detect it. But that's essentially what's happening. So we say our custom devices are 24 to 26 dB noise reduction rating. So if you put a gunshot at 140, essentially at ear level, if the fit is everything, a 26 dB reduction from that peak of 140 would bring it down to 114. Mm-hmm. Seems high, but the alternative is worse. I mean, basically, you're talking not a continuous exposure at that level; it's fractions of a second at that. And with the electronic devices, if you had in comparison with a foam earplug, with a foam earplug, if it was a 26 dB NRR rating, would act the exact same way that our custom electronics would and provide the same level of protection, but you would not be able to hear in between every shot. And that's kind of where we can get into the use case for electronic versus non-electronic, being able to hear in your environment. That was the main reason I never wore earplugs. Was I need to be able to hear. Why would I wear an earplug? Not knowing that these products existed, of course. So.
Yeah, and I think the one point I would want to make to tag on to Lance is that, if you're bringing it down from 140 to 126 or 140 to 114, you mentioned it earlier about the critical level, and they talk about these levels that approach 140 where no duration is a safe duration. Well, if we bring it from 140 down to 114, then we're still operating on that time intensity trade-off. And we're bringing it down from that critically dangerous level where even a single exposure can cause permanent damage to a level where you got a chance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I have one question for each of you, and then we could probably wrap it up. We're about, 45 minutes in so far. Dave, for maybe give us an idea of levels of hearing loss, and maybe like a real warning of if you hit this point, then you either need these or it won't be long before you're in the category of really bad shape.
Sure. And it's a challenging question because when you go to a professional and get an audiogram done, which is the way that most of us determine whether we first have a hearing loss or not, it's really looking at the range of frequencies that I mentioned at the beginning of this session, from the range of frequencies that are important for speech, and that range is between 250 hertz and roughly 8,000 hertz. So that range does not encompass the entire range of audibility for human hearing, but rather the range that's important for speech. So when you go in and you see a professional and they do an audiogram, they're testing across that frequency range, and then they're testing the very softest sounds that you hear relative to the normal population. And so any number at any frequency that is between 0 and 20 decibels is considered to be within normal limits. Any number higher than that begins to be first a mild degree of loss, and then mild will go anywhere from 20 to 40, and then moderate will be from 40 to 60 roughly, severe from 60 to 80, profound 80 dB or more. And so what happens with noise exposure typically is the higher pitches within that audiogram are going to be where you see the damage first and more extensive as the damage from noise exposure increases. Part of that was to mention where the ear naturally amplifies by about 15 dB in those high frequency regions. So you can hear speech, but also when that noise comes in, it amplifies it. Unfortunately, as you get older, you also lose sensitivity in the high frequencies. Those high frequencies show up with noise damage and simple aging. And that's where the high frequency speech sounds like S, F, TH, SH all occur. And so the audiogram is a very simple picture of your hearing sensitivity that really requires a more extensive deep dive. But I would say, in a simple sense, when you do the self-test or look at the audiogram, if your numbers are all zeros or 20s, up to between 0 and 20, you're in pretty good shape. 20 to 40 is a mild degree of loss in certain frequencies. 40 to 60 is moderate. 60 to 80 is severe. 80 or more is what we consider to be profound, and you're going to have significant difficulties. That range and the frequencies where it occurs is really where the professional could come in to try to help guide you a little bit to say, will hearing aids help? And for most people, the answer is yes, until it does get to that severe to profound range. And then fortunately, during my lifetime, my professional lifetime, there has been technology called a cochlear implant that can help people even if they have a profound hearing loss. There is a surgical procedure that can bring back some hearing functionality. And some of the technologies, if you look at YouTube videos and just put in cochlear implant, you'll get a box of Kleenex out, because it's pretty remarkable.
Oh, that's the one where the kids hear for the first time.
Exactly.
Oh my God! Yeah, I can't watch this.
Yeah, and so we have a foundation that goes around. The founder of our company goes and fits people around the world with hearing aids, in many cases in emerging countries where they haven't had the benefit of having a professional come in or technology to help them. And there's never a dry eye in the house when you're encountering some of this, because hearing is something that we so often take for granted until it's gone. And like I say, there are a wide variety of consumer technologies and professionally fitted devices, and to fit everyone's budget, but also to ensure that you find what's best for you. We often say our technology in the professional's hands is the best way to go for people who are more do-it-themselves minded. Certainly I'd say give it a shot. But today, most hearing losses can be benefited by some sort of prosthetic device, whether it's a hearing aid, a cochlear implant. But I know tonight what we've been talking about is trying to prevent that from occurring before it occurs. And I can't ever talk about this to people without sort of bringing up Helen Keller, who suffered from both visual impairment and hearing loss. Mm-hmm. And she talks about how vision brings in the beauty of the outside world and it connects us to things. But hearing for most of us is what connects us to each other. And I think no matter what environment we're in, whether it's family or you want to hear, like you said, when your dad, is out hunting and he's with you, he wants to hear you, he wants to hear the game. Don't take that for granted and don't wait too long to do something about it.
Yeah, this has definitely pushed me in that direction. And maybe even, I don't know if you could give me a quick diagnosis of what I feel like might be going on with my ears, but it seems like if there's a white noise, like maybe the sink is on and my wife's trying to talk to me, I will have to either turn that off or walk away from it, because that noise in the background, or the dryer going or something like that, just a constant noise, it really is difficult for me to hear her. So I assume that's some level of hearing loss that I should probably take care of.
I think it's early stages, and what ends up happening is the first time people begin to notice difficulty is in background noise environments, whether it's at a restaurant, a cocktail party, or even the white noise from the faucet like that. Mm-hmm. Because what ends up happening is, and I won't try to get too wonky, but in the inner ear, in the cochlea, so I said the outer ear is what you see, the middle ear is where, if your kids have an ear infection, where that occurs. The inner ear is in the thing that's shaped like a snail, and it's called the cochlea. That damage, when it occurs, there are tiny hair cells that help tune the ear and send neurological impulses to the brain. The brain is where you really hear. The ear is just sort of separating out the different pitches. When damage occurs from shooting, what ends up is those tiny little hair cells are damaged, and it makes your ear less sensitive to tuning, like you'd think of the tuning on a piano, and it goes and it starts to introduce distortion. And then when you add noise in any kind of listening environment, it's adding additional distortion that now, because you have loss, it's no longer as sharp as it was as before that damage occurred. So what you're noticing is a very real world example of the consequences of some noise damage that's probably already present, if I could test your hearing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm going to go in and tell my wife that I'm not ignoring her, and I actually have issues with the cochlea in my ear. So
I suspect you do.
So take that and be nice to me. Because I tell you what, it is very frustrating, because it doesn't matter if my truck's running and she's yelling at me from the house, like, I'll have to get away from it to hear her. And it's, even those few steps to get away from it or turn the truck off is just an inconvenience, right? So
okay, so I'll give you a tip that you can tell her when you go back and talk to her after we're here tonight. So if you're working on your truck, or you're watching a TV program, or you're reading a book, and she comes into the room to talk to you, if she just starts talking and you've got your attention focused on something else, you're going to miss the first few words of what she says. we're programmed as humans to recognize our voice. So if she comes into the room, says your name, it'll break the attention on you working on the truck or the TV show or the book. And then she starts talking and she won't have to repeat herself as often. Now that's with or without hearing aids, but have her try that. And then also tell her not to have her back turned to you from across the room and expect you're going to hear everything.
All right. Very nice. And I appreciate that. We'll try it out.
See how that goes.
Yeah.
Worth a shot.
Hey, before you talk to me, say my
Thanks.
name and break my attention of
There you go.
what I'm really interested in, right?
Well, wait a minute. Wait. Just leave that last part.
Is that what you
off.
said?
Leave
Is
that
that
last part off. That was not exactly what
Dr.
I
Dave
said.
told me. So, that's funny. So, Lance, one last thing for you. We were talking and you said a lot of guys that are coming back from war zones and veterans, you guys do a bit of work with them, and maybe just go ahead and talk to that if you could.
Yeah, so we have, through the VA, and Dave's probably more used to lead this department here, but, people come back with hearing loss and they're not really, soldiers and military. They're wearing protection overseas, but they're not wearing it all the time or when they need to. Thankfully for, some smart technology and things like that, it's becoming more and more common in that place, but regardless of that, they are coming back with hearing loss. And, at Starkey, we have a contract with the VA to help them hear better. Talking hearing aids, but they are getting fit with hearing aids to help them with their hearing loss when they come back. So I guess that's the long and short of it.
Yeah,
there.
and I think that's important.
Tinnitus is the number one service-connected disability for soldiers coming back from military conflict. Tinnitus is, and hearing loss is like number 2 or 3 among all of the things that they're facing in giving their service to this country. And so we want to protect the damage from occurring that the tinnitus is a consequence of. As Lance said, the technology for them is getting better, and then we're privileged to work with veterans as the only American company that is involved directly in service provision for hearing aids. But we'd rather work with them before the damage occurs.
Yeah, and I know our listenership has a lot of servicemen and women, and we're always thankful for them and what they do, and kudos to you guys for being a part of that and helping out. So definitely very awesome. Anything else you guys want to touch on? We're about at an hour, which I kind of promised 30 minutes, but there's way too much good information here. So
I don't have anything, I guess. We covered a lot. We covered a lot from hearing aids to hearing protection and the importance.
Yeah.
I guess I can end on my side is just, do something before it's too late, whether it's sound gear or other products. I mean, you have to wear something when you're out shooting. It's not, you got to keep in mind too, it's not just you shooting. You're all, 4 or 5 guys in layout blinds. It's them shooting too. And then you got your spring snow season. I mean, even more. So it's even more critical in those situations than others, but always have some type of hearing protection.
Go ahead and plug, any social media or websites that you guys want to put out there.
You can check out our products on soundgear.com. Dave mentioned the Hearing Foundation if you want some tear jerkers, but StarkeyHearingFoundation.com or .org, Dave? .org?
.org, and then Starkey.com,
and then
StarkeyY.com. And we really appreciate your I mean, obviously this is something we're very passionate about. We could talk all day about this, but we appreciate your raising awareness for the importance of this. I think we're on the verge of some big innovations that are moving hearing aids from single-purpose devices to multi-purpose, multi-function ones that can do all sorts of sophisticated features are contained on these devices that a few years ago people didn't think were possible. And as I said, if a person suspects they have a loss, do something about that. But then as well, doing something about it before the damage occurs is what's important. So thanks for the focus on that this evening.
Very nice.
Yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and thank you guys, because I know Lance is heading out to go hunting. Dave, I heard you're flying overseas to do some stuff. So,
on the weekend. Yep.
I appreciate you guys jumping on, and I really enjoyed it. It was a long time coming, and
Yeah.
Josh and I have been talking about getting some knowledgeable fellas on here about this, and I really think that our listeners will enjoy it.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
So thank
you.
guys.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Well, thank you to Lance and Dr. Dave for coming on the show and spending some time with us and shedding all kinds of great knowledge and information for all of us to take in. So thank you to them, and hopefully give you a little more perspective on protecting your hearing and the importance of all of that stuff. So please consider that if you haven't in the past. I think that's pretty much going to do it for this week. Before we get out of here, I want to take a minute to thank Lifetime Decoys, Gunner Kennels, Base Map, 737 Duck and Goose Calls, Duck Camp, and Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy, the world's most comprehensive online gun dog training resource. They've got over 160 instructional videos that includes everything you need to take a 7-week-old puppy to a finished gun dog. Visit cornerstonegundogacademy.com, sign up for the free preview module, and begin your training journey today. Cornerstone Gun Dog Academy, the most advanced gun dog training resource on the web. All right, that does it for episode 155. Thank you to the guys from Sound Gear for coming on the show and spending some time with us and shedding some knowledge on hearing protection and the harm of muzzle blast. If you're new to the show, head over to iTunes, check out all of our past episodes, and while you're there, you can leave us a 5-star rating and review. We certainly would appreciate it. It'll help like-minded hunters just like you find our show. That's going to do it for this week. Till we're back next week. For Dan, I'm Josh. Take care.